Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are, and welcome to Focal Point Fest 2022's career panel. My name is Joanne Moore, and I'm going to be facilitating the session today with our fabulous panelists, Liat Rennert and Chibesa Mwape. Thank you all for joining us for this session. We hope that you'll find that it is productive, practical, and leaves you with some practical, useful tools as you're beginning your career or expanding your career in international development. We're very excited that we have an in-person gathering for students in Jerusalem at a Focal Point event. And we're really glad that you all are able to join us. And after this event, you'll be able to do some networking and in-person, face-to-face opportunities to chat with people. So enjoy that once we sign off. Throughout this session, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions. You can put the questions in the chat. We really encourage you to ask questions. We have a few questions prepared, but all of us are more interested in engaging with you than we are in necessarily responding to our own questions. So please put your questions in the chat as you think of them, and we'll get to as many of them as we can throughout the event. So just by way of the introduction, again, my name is Joanne Moore. I'm currently the acting managing director for the Peers Program for Global Innovation, which is based in Tel Aviv, which is where I am. And the Peers Program focuses on working with Israeli startups and businesses to enter emerging markets, either by bringing relevant products and services to those markets or adapting those products and services along with the business models. When I'm not doing that, I am a consultant for USAID's implementing partners, primarily in sub-Saharan Africa. And when I'm not doing that, I volunteer all the time because I don't know how to say no. So I'm really looking forward to our session today, and I'm going to hand it over to Liat to introduce herself.
Okay, thanks, Joanne. So my name is Liat. I was born and raised in Israel. I currently work for Nala Foundation. It's an NGO that does public health work in developing in Ethiopia, mainly, although we're expanding now. I have an MPH from Tel Aviv University, Masters of Public Health with the disaster management concentration. And I've been in this field for about a decade. I've worked with JDC, with ISRAID. Currently, I'm the humanitarian program manager for NALA. We're responding to a very severe humanitarian crisis in northern Ethiopia that's been ongoing for the past year and a half. And previously, I was country director for NALA in Ethiopia for about 4 years. So yeah, I've been in the development humanitarian field for a while. I started as a volunteer, and then I found my way to more professional paid positions. And yeah, and that's what I'm doing right now.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Liat. And Chibesa Mwape, will you introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Joanne. I'm totally thrilled to be here at the conference today. And I just need to give you full disclosure. My internet connectivity might not be great, but that's why we want to work in international development, right? And if it's unstable, I'll just switch off my video. My name is Chibesa Mwape, and I'm currently on the Copper Belt in Zambia, but work from Washington, D.C. My day job is a career advisor at the George Washington University, where I support alumni and graduate students of public policy and public administration, 50% of the time, and the other half I spend working with mainly international students, also graduate students within the data science program. My background is in communication science, human resources, and international development. I love what I do, working with people who are trying to segue into international development or humanitarian affairs. And what I've done is, having been an accompanying spouse, but I consider myself a star, and I'll talk about that later, is that I have been able to build resources, knowledge, information, and a toolbox to support international development professionals such as yourselves or those trying to enter this labor market? Thank you, Joanne.
My pleasure. Thank you. So just to give a little bit of context, over the last almost 30 years that I've been in the industry, there has definitely been changes in how one goes about starting a career or building a career in international development. So just a few things to think about. First of all, 30 years ago, I was literally the only person I knew who was doing this kind of work. Most of the work was centered in very specific areas. In the United States, it was mostly in Washington, D.C., European capitals, some parts of Asia, and then all over Africa, Asia, Latin America, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East. There were a range of organizations, but primarily NGOs, for-profit companies, or sometimes they're referred to as contractors, universities, and some small foundations. It was, to some extent, a sector more so than what I would consider an industry, which is really what we are today. There were multiple ways to enter, but many people didn't realize that this was a professional field. Most people that I knew 30 years ago started off as volunteers. If you were American, often a Peace Corps volunteer, British had a VOCA volunteers, et cetera. And then people transitioned into NGOs, private companies, working directly for governments through USAID, UK Aid, et cetera, the World Bank, or occasionally working for foundations. The networks were really interconnected. It was a much smaller community. In some ways, everyone sort of knew everyone else. And there were really sort of two ways to think about the industry. There were organizations that were organized technically, and then there were organizations that were organized geographically. And much beyond that, there weren't massive differences except in size or in the makeup of the companies or NGOs themselves. I think the biggest change that we're seeing today is that over the last 30 years, there's been a very consistent transition from predominantly expatriates leading programs to seeing more and more host country nationals leading programs. We see many more local NGOs and some private sector companies that are taking the lead in their particular technical sectors. We're also seeing way more professionals entering the market than there ever were previously. We see a lot of people who are coming in with varied skill sets. So whereas there used to be a lot of generalists, maybe some MPHs, et cetera, now we see a lot of MBAs, engineers, et cetera. And so we're seeing some really positive developments in the industry overall. Obviously, COVID has also changed the way that people are entering the industry and the way the industry is engaging in terms of a lot of Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever your thing of your technology of choice is. We also have things like WhatsApp, whereas 30 years ago, I was faxing things back and forth, and sometimes it could take days, email, et cetera. And we're starting to see, I think, much more focus on both management as an actual skill set, as well as more varied technical skill sets, as the range of technologies and solutions available continues to grow at a really prolific rate. So I think those are just some of the sort of big picture things that we want to think about. And so, Liat, I want to ask you, what has your professional journey been since you graduated from your degree? And what are some of the decisions you made that were key to your career so far?
Thank you. So I feel like the career chose me and not so much that I chose it. I've been volunteering since I got out of the Army. And that was also what led me to go and get my MPH in disaster management, because I knew that I need to have the theoretical foundation for getting where I want to get and doing things properly. So after I graduated, it took a while to find a job. I will say that it's a very competitive field, and there are a lot of people that want to be in it, and there's no point in sugarcoating it. It's challenging to get in. But I think one of the things that I made a decision to do was that I need to get my foot in the door, and that's the important part. So I was offered something that was not exactly what I had in mind. It was a semi-paid position, kind of half volunteer, half paid position. And it wasn't exactly in the humanitarian aid field that I had big dreams about, but I still identified it as an opportunity. And I decided that it's close enough to what I want to do, and it is a door that can open. So I took a job as a volunteer coordinator for health projects in Ethiopia with Project 10 that belongs to the Jewish Agency. And I did that for a year. And it turned out to be a wonderful experience and also a really good decision, because it's thanks to that role that organizations started to know me. And I was then offered a job, a pretty senior job, and ended up being country director for a few years in Ethiopia with another organization, with NALA. And this is definitely a door that opened thanks to taking that first step. I didn't qualify on paper to be country director, but this is the key sometimes. If you get an opportunity and you prove yourself, it can be your way in, and it definitely worked out amazingly for me. So I would say this is also the beginning of my journey, but also one of the key decisions that I made was to settle a bit on pay and to settle a bit on not being in a humanitarian setting, but to know that it's close enough, that it is in Ethiopia, which is a place that I'd volunteered in before. So I was already very much inclined to coming back, and to identify the opportunity. And I think this was one of the keys. Similar thing happened to me with IsraAid. I was actually volunteering just for fun, not in order to open a door, but it turned into a job offer. So you really never know. You really have to be open to opportunities. And these were kind of my decisions to be flexible. I think were very significant. And I ended up being in Ethiopia for 4 years and being with IsraAid on several missions. And this has really developed my career path tremendously. So I would say these are the main aspects of how I've gotten to where I am today.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So Chibesa, what led you to become a career coach, and how has your personal experience in international development formed your career choice?
Thank you very much, Joanne. I would say that most of my personal and professional life has been dedicated to making the lives of others more meaningful and impactful. Just from early on, I believe I was a people pleaser as a child. I wanted everybody to be happy and settled. And somehow that shifted into my professional life. I had said that I consider myself a STAR, and the acronym is Spouses Traveling and Relocating Successfully. Boom. We are not trailing spouses. So what I did, because my husband's work takes us to several places at different times, I needed to create a portable career for myself. I was born and bred in Zambia. I was educated in Zambia. I am from the global South, so I have firsthand experience about some of the issues that we're facing as a developing nation. And because I am not an international development professional myself, I realized that I could have impact on international development professionals by helping them find meaningful careers and happiness in their careers. And my experience so far has been that I have learned more about international development. I have made a commitment and a pledge that my impact will come through the clients that I serve. I remember the first time I left home, when I left Zambia with my partner at the time. We had moved to Denmark, actually, before we went to Ghana. And when we got to Ghana, I was really excited because I believed I was going to another African country. That was mistake number one, because I did not make time to learn about the business culture, if you will. And I got a job very quickly on arrival, which I had to leave after 3 months and just try to find my campus again. And just by learning and understanding that global mobility, relocating, for those that have done this before, we know what challenges we face. So just understanding what I needed to do before moving to the next location was really important for me. This is the second time I'm living in the United States. We had come in 2018 and things didn't work out. I wasn't able to get a job, but then I was studying, so that was great. I was doing international development and HR at the time, and I had the best grades at the time because I was studying more or less full time. But then what I learned is that when you are moving into a new place, be it a job, a location, a department, pivoting into a new career, it is really important to understand the first step that you need to take. It's also important to understand who you are and what you can do. Was I thrown off?
No, you're still with us.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much. I just lost the screen. And it is important also to be able to make that alignment between your personal goals with your professional goals, and the joy and satisfaction that comes with working with either students who are getting into international development as they look for their first job, or somebody who's just trying to segue from one industry to the next, maybe humanitarian affairs. It is important to know what your strengths are, where your knowledge lies, and really where you thrive the most. That environment that you're trying to get yourself into is crucial. Thank you, Joanne.
Oh, fantastic. So I couldn't agree more with everything that both of you said. And I'll just add that early on when I moved to Washington, D.C. after Peace Corps, a recruiter for an NGO, his name was Michael, probably gave me the smartest piece of advice, which was, you really don't know anything, you don't understand the industry, go get a job. It doesn't matter what the job is, just go get a job. And after a year or two, you'll have a better sense of who you are, where you fit into the industry, what your opportunities and your options are, and you'll have built up a little bit of a network. And I think what you guys both described is very consistent with that advice. I've tried to pay it forward over the years. Michael's a legend, in at least my mind. Okay, so Liat, from your experience, what are the top 3 tips that you would offer for somebody who is looking to start a career in international development?
Okay, so I think the first one is the one that I also stressed already, is prioritizing hands-on opportunities. That's the most, if you have an opportunity, take it, it will pay off. People are looking for experience. Having the education is good, but you do want to also have people are very much interested in hiring you based on your experience. So if you have an opportunity, even if it's not exactly as you've envisioned it, so definitely I would go for it if I were you. The second thing is, this goes along with kind of knowing yourself and your skills and what you're able to deal with. You would be facing a choice between working at the headquarters level or in the field. These are very different things. It varies and it depends, different organizations, and if they're smaller, the lines might be a bit blurrier, but overall, if I had to sum it up, the field life is a bit rougher. You're faced with a lot of challenges. You often end up doing a lot more yourself. You're the finance manager and the program manager and the logistics person, and you're often just trying to handle everything. If you're working in very rough settings, so it's also a bit mentally challenging, emotionally challenging. So you really need to know if you are a good fit for that. And by the way, volunteering is a way of kind of getting to know yourself in a sense before you take on huge roles. And the headquarters level is often a bit more of a comfortable setting. It's sometimes you're focused more on strategy, on donors, on PR. It's kind of less one-on-one contact. For myself, I love working with people. And whenever I'm in the office, I regret that I'm not in the field. So I love the one-on-one. I love being with the people. And then just really, it's just a different type of vibe of working. So you can also switch between them. But it's good to have some kind of idea of what interests you more, but don't think that it's exclusive. You can definitely start at one if that door is to open, and then shift to the other one as you gain some more skills and more understanding of the field. And the third thing would be to try to broaden your search. So if you have a very specific role in mind, you might get frustrated because you won't be able to find just that, because again, it's very competitive and it's hard to get that. But if you're willing to take things that are close enough, if you know that you want to work with women or with children, there are a lot of organizations in different fields that work with these target groups. So it might be a bit easier to kind of set broad preferences, but not to have a very, very specific thing in mind, because that would just be frustrating. And maybe just one more thing that is not here, but I think smaller organizations are often a great place to start. You get more responsibility, you get more learning opportunities. If you're part of a huge organization, you'll probably kind of get lost and won't get as much, hands-on experience. So personally, I would vote for smaller organizations as a great learning platform. This is in a nutshell.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm going to actually just use this opportunity to say I don't disagree with you. Small organizations are an amazing opportunity to get experiences, especially because there just are never enough hands to go around. I will say one of the advantages of working for a larger organization is that you'll find you have more mentors. You have more upward mobility, so more opportunities. You also have more lateral mobility. So you might start off in one technical area or one geographic area and be able to move around a little bit more. So I think there are advantages and disadvantages to both. And I'm really glad that you brought that up because I think it's a very important point. Chibesa, I'd like to ask you the same question. From your experience, what are your top 3 tips for somebody who's looking to start this career?
Absolutely. Just to piggyback on what Liat had mentioned earlier, she said that entering this job market is competitive, but obviously Liat is a success story, so it is not impossible. Therefore, one of the things that you want to do is to position yourself strategically for international development job market. When you're applying for a position, and many of us have done this before, we do not review job descriptions completely. So before you apply, the first thing that you want to do is to understand the mission and the vision of the organization or the unit, because this will help to strengthen your narrative when you're putting your career documents together or when you're getting ready for an interview. And one of the things for those that have not considered this before, I think it's important to know who you want to serve. Do you want to work with women and children? Do you want to work for refugees? Review those sustainable development goals, those 17 sustainable development goals. Take a look at decent work and economic growth. Is it something that excites you? That's number 8. Or number 10, you want to work on reduced inequalities, or maybe you want to work on gender inequality, which is number 5. So this is really important. Once you understand the mission and the vision of the organization, you align that with your personal, what we call a personal MVV. Your personal MVV is your mission, your vision, and your values. The second thing that you want to do is to identify your own skills and your experience, your education. I think Liat had also mentioned this, that education is really important. They're also looking for experience. And that experience, sometimes you might be thinking, but I really don't have the actual experience. But sometimes just thinking outside of the box, ask yourself about a time when you did a specific project and you used that skill. Think about that skill, and if it's required in that job, make sure that you highlight it. Make sure that it stands out because you want to lead with impact. Then you also want to understand about that job. What will the incumbent do on a daily basis? What will they do on a regular basis? Then you develop your career documents that are strong and compelling. Your story matters. So create a narrative that's compelling enough for them to want to reach out to you. My second point is leveraging your transferable skills. Again, just going back to where you went, a time when you worked on a specific project and perhaps you engaged a communication skills, communication strategy. Perhaps you did an assessment or a midterm review. Think about those things and then start plugging them into your career documents. That's your cover letter. That's also your resume or CV. At entry level, in fact, Someone once said, this came from a recruiter, and I totally agree with the person, because they said it's not about where you start, but where you finish that matters. So what you want to do, if it's at entry level or you're moving from one industry to the next, or from one United Nations agency to the next, consider yourself as an entry level applicant, because it's all about professional growth. So these transferable skills could be communications or teamwork or leadership, speaking effectively, listening actively, problem solving, analytical thinking. This should be part of that narrative that I talked about earlier. These are some of the tangible skills, if you will, that you want to sell in order to stand apart from the competition. Because at the end of the day, I'll tell you, the hiring manager is looking for a person who will do the job right now. And I have heard from many HR business partners, HR officers who say that it is not the most qualified person who usually gets the job, but it's the one who's able to sell their skills who tends to stand out. And finally, create a compelling branding statement. This might sound overwhelming. Some people call it an elevator pitch or a professional summary in your CV, your resume. As a star, I've experienced career identity crisis. And this might happen particularly when we're pivoting from one job to the next, where you just don't know who you are. But really, it starts with knowing thyself, understanding who you are. And I'll give you some prompts. I'll try and say them slowly, but I need to move fast. But it's important to know who you are. It's also important to be able to articulate what you do, how you do it, and how people feel when you have done it. So this could be your supervisor, it could be your colleagues. I'll give you a very quick example for myself. If I have to introduce myself by creating a compelling branding statement, I would say my name is Chiwesa Mwape. I am a certified career coach serving international development professionals to find meaningful careers. It doesn't have to be long, make it short, but remember one thing, it is not casting granite. That branding statement is going to need some tweaking every time you apply for a new position. And that branding statement is something that you should also consider plugging onto your LinkedIn profile, because recruiters are using an algorithm to find candidates with the right keywords on the platform. Joanne.
Amazing. I love everything that you said. And I just want to add one additional point, which is that I think it's so important to remember that when you are interviewing, you should be yourself. And you need to remember that they're interviewing you, but you're also interviewing them. You really want it to be a good fit in terms of the culture, the values, the position, what you bring, what you can learn, what you want, etc. But I loved everything that you said. So I also have a few tips after all these years of applying for jobs. So I think one of the first things I said about Michael is, if you're just starting out, get a job, get any job, but more importantly, learn how to do that job really well. I find that oftentimes people start and maybe they're not starting out in exactly the position they wanted, or they thought it was the position they wanted, but they're not sure, whatever. And they start looking around and they forget about the work that they've actually been hired to do. If you learn how to do your job and do it really well, new opportunities will come your way. People will stand up and notice when you put your work conduct your work at the highest standard, when you hold yourself to the highest standard, when you think about not just getting the job done, but really excellence. That's where I think the sky's the limit. You will have any opportunity that you want, and you can take advantage of everything that your organization has to offer. I think both Liat and Chiwesa sort of touched on this in different ways. I think oftentimes people focus on the title of a job without actually thinking about the substance of the job. But the reality is, especially in this day and age, we're working 8, 10, 12 hours a day. And it's really the substance of the job, the day in and the day out, that you need to like, to love, or at least to want to learn. there are multiple organizations where you will have the title of, for example, associate. But an associate can be an entry-level position for some places, and it can be a more senior position somewhere else. An associate can be largely administrative. It can also be a mix of administrative and technical and management, etc. Don't worry about the title. As far as I'm concerned, you can call me the dog catcher. What I really want to know is, what am I going to be doing every day, and am I going to enjoy myself doing it? The last thing I'd say is that there are many ways to contribute to the international development sector that are outside of the obvious technical sectors. So I think a lot of people think about, do I want to be involved in public health? Do I want to be involved in entrepreneurship? Do I want to focus on engineering, water, WASH, something like that? But actually, within every single development organization, there are people who are doing things like contracts, grants management, procurement, all sorts of support activities that without those activities, the technical programs could not move forward. I think oftentimes we really underestimate the value of management. But the reality is that every single position you will ever do, whether it's a home office position, a field-based position, a more entry-level position, a more senior position, there are elements that are administrative, there are elements that are more management focused. You need to understand budgeting, you need to understand the technical sector, you need to understand how to manage expectations for clients, etc. So there are so many ways that you can contribute, and a smart way to tackle the industry initially is to think about what it is that you know that you can bring to the table and what it is that you want to learn that an organization is willing to teach you. So lots of different ways to look at the job market here. So I see that there's already a couple of questions in the chat. So I want to start with a question from Matthew, who ironically is a friend and a former colleague of mine. So Matthew, thanks so much for joining us. So there's so much change taking place in the industry, and there's a big focus on localization. So do you ever get the sense as an expat, and each one of us is considered an expat in a different way, that you might be doing the job that a person from that country can or should be doing? And if yes, how are you managing that? And if not, where or how do you feel that expats bring value? So do one of you want to take a stab at that? Liat?
Yeah, I can start. I like that question a lot. It's definitely something that's always there, always in our minds. It's one of the things that I found that I struggled with as an expat. I'm automatically granted a lot of credit by the people that I'm working with just because I'm an expat, which is so wrong in my opinion, and it shouldn't be that way. So I was often kind of trying to fend off this automatic credit. I need to earn my credit if I do things properly. And it's definitely something that, at least in Ethiopia, felt it very, very strongly. One of the things that my favorite parts of my organization of NALA is that we're extremely aware and we are striving to be as local as possible. I was the only expat on the team of about 20, and I took every measure I could to be in the background as much as possible. Sometimes they would invite me to speak at the beginning of meetings, and I never agreed. I always was at the back row, trying to kind of, blend in, disappear into the background, because we're not the ones to make the change. We can only offer support or tools. And I do think that there are some things that we can bring as an initial learning process, things around innovation, things around, that I think Israel just does pretty well. And I do believe that we have these things to offer, but between that and, being the ones to run the show is a huge gap. And I never viewed myself as the expat, as the one that was leading it. I was there to support, and I was working with my team completely. And I could say that after I finished my job as country director, we also now have a fully local team in Ethiopia. We don't have any expats at all. So I think this is a very good question, and this is very important to be mindful of as you enter this field. Just seeing, as Matthew said, what the added value is, and stepping back as much as possible on anything else, because I will never know what the community needs in Ethiopia better than someone there. Absolutely. So humbly, I can try to offer the things that I brought with me, but it's a very good question. I think it's really important to be very, very mindful of this throughout every project or every personal interaction even that you have.
Chibesa, do you also want to address that question?
I would say that one of the things that I had mentioned earlier is collaborative skills. And when Liat was describing her own experience and how she overcomes that, is having the collaborative skills to demonstrate that you're not taking away from them, but you're working together in order to work towards a similar goal. I think what happened in the past, in the 70s and 80s, when we saw a lot of aid coming into Africa, we had a lot of expats from the West who came in and saying, I have the knowledge, I know what to do, and this is how we do it. And that just doesn't work really well with the locals. And I think, Joanne, in the beginning, you had mentioned that we are seeing more nationals, country nationals, taking up some of these positions, which I think is fantastic. But just having that ability to collaborate and not coming in as a leader, even if you're a leader, it's important to demonstrate that you are a collaborative leader and you're there to serve and not necessarily to bring in expertise that they have a shortage of. Because when I work with some of my international development clients, the stories that I hear are, I have similar skills, I have a strong background, I have field work experience, and then I feel like a colleague comes in and they're telling me what to do, like they know better than I do. It's important to have a good level of recognition of what's happening on the ground, what the culture is like, and as Liat had mentioned, just humbly offer what it is that you're bringing, but it's also important not to lose focus on the goal. Thank you.
I agree 100% with both of you, and I love that the word humility came up. I think any expat walking into any situation in our field needs to come in with a great deal of humility. And Matthew, I love this question because I do think over time, even from the very start as a Peace Corps volunteer, I realized that the people that I was working with were much better positioned to do the work that I had been brought in to do. I like to think of the role of expats oftentimes as facilitators. We're often there to help set people up to be successful. I think that the international development industry has its own language. It has its own rhythms, it has its own lingo, and not everyone has equal access to that. So I like to see my job as facilitating that, spreading the access, so to speak, and really setting people up to be successful so that, I can walk away and they can continue on and grow from there. So I think that's a great question. Thank you guys so much. We have a question from Naomi, who is with us from the Jerusalem Watch Party. Yay. What's one thing that you did in your career search that you would do differently today? I can tell you, I'll start because I give this advice. Now, I will say this ironically. I teach a seminar in a generalist international development program. I didn't mention before, but I have a first degree in African and Afro-American studies and a second degree, technically I'm an economist, but with a focus on political economy in sub-Saharan Africa, both essentially generalist degrees. And when people come to me and talk about a graduate degree at whatever stage in your career you are, I strongly discourage people from doing a generalist degree or exclusively doing a generalist degree. So if you're going to do a generalist degree, do it in combination with a technical skill set. So whether it's engineering, a master's in public health, a master's in business, masters in water and sanitation and hygiene, it doesn't matter. A generalist degree, I think in this day and age, won't get you as far as it once did. I feel blessed that I started 30 years ago and could get away with it. I don't think you can get away with it today in the same way. And I wouldn't underestimate what are often referred to as soft skills or transferable skills. So a degree in leadership and management, project management, et cetera, can be very helpful, especially when it's coupled with other skills that you can bring to the party. So I think if I had to do it all over again, I would not do a generalist degree. Liat, how would you answer that question?
So it's it's ironic because it's a mistake that I still make, that I'm currently making as we speak. I'm not good at using networks. I don't know if it's like a mistake, but it's definitely, I don't feel comfortable reaching out to people and just kind of, once my foot is in the door, these options open up and you should reach out. You should feel comfortable. I'm actually in the process of relocating to New York and I'm currently searching for a job and I'm using 10% of the network that I could be using. So this is a mistake in my job search and it's an ongoing mistake apparently. But I think it's definitely, that's the way things work. You should feel comfortable to reach out to people that are somewhat in your network. And it can really make the difference because when you're just applying to a job without reaching out, you're just another CV in the pile. And oftentimes these jobs, unfortunately, are just kind of determined amongst people that, were brought by other people, by members of the team. So if you do have those contacts and connections, you should feel confident to use them. I mean, don't be worried about kind of disturbing people or, because that's how it works in this field. Yeah.
So Leah, I just want to add one thing to what you said. It's a personal pet peeve, but I've subsequently read that I was right, which is if you are going to use LinkedIn and you are going to connect to somebody that you do not know or that someone else has connected you to or that you are currently watching on this career panel, don't just connect. Use the note feature to say, hi, Chibesa, I saw you on the alum career panel today. I'd really like to talk to you about some of the things you discussed. I look forward to being in touch because I don't accept LinkedIn requests from people I don't know. That's technically how you were supposed to use LinkedIn, although a lot of people treat it more like Facebook and the more players you have, you win. But LinkedIn is really meant to be a professional tool. And so treat it like a professional tool so that when somebody reaches out to you and says, can you connect me to someone? You actually know that person, you know how you were connected to them, and you can make a determination about how best to help them network and facilitate. So Chibesa, how would you answer that question?
And I would just right now start a workshop on that, Joanne, because you're absolutely right. But the only thing I'll say very quickly is that feature to send a note does not exist on your mobile devices. So if you're going to send a connection request, make sure that you're using a computer or a laptop. One of the things that I've done in my career search that I'll do differently today is to begin my search before moving because my situation is unique. I'm the accompanying spouse. So what I need to do a little bit more of is to look at what opportunities are available at my next, at our next location, at the next duty station. I think this is really key because I know that it would alleviate some of that frustration that comes with career chaos and career identity crisis in the new location.
Fantastic, great. So interestingly enough, the last question that we had in the chat builds nicely on what we were just talking about, which is what do you see as the role of social media in finding a job? Are there specific social media venues that you think are useful? And do you have any tips or tricks to the trade, so to speak? So we talked about LinkedIn, and I'll just say personally, I think LinkedIn is extremely useful. I find it exceptionally annoying when people have a LinkedIn profile that isn't complete. Because if I want to make an introduction, I want to know what your current position is. I want to know what you're doing in that position to be able to introduce you to somebody else and make those connections. I also want to be able to link your profile rather than connecting a CV or something like that, or having to take the time to write out a summary of who you are and what you do. The other thing I would say is Liat also touched on this. There's lots of ways to network. I think there's some cultural differences. So if you guys didn't notice, I was born in the US and I am an American. I'm also an Israeli citizen. Here in Israel, people really love Facebook and they use Facebook for both business and social. In my world, LinkedIn is business and Facebook is social. But there are quite a few Facebook groups related to international development. And within those Facebook groups, you can often see job advertisements. You can also see people who are doing the kind of work that you want to be doing. And it's great to network. And then the last thing I would say is I think social media is amazing, but don't forget that informational interviews are an amazing opportunity to network and to really get to know what's out there. And people are very generous with their time if you're a serious person. So if people ask me for an informational interview and they want to know about the organization, know about my professional journey, want tips or whatever, I'm willing to make the time to do it. And so if you are willing to connect to somebody and ask them for an informational interview, ultimately it might not lead to a job in that organization or even right away in that organization, but it's one part of building the network. So Chibesa, how would you respond around the social media piece?
Yeah, they're both very important, and I'll explain. LinkedIn, as Joanne had said, is the largest professional networking platform. There are about 830 million users on LinkedIn. And it's important also to note that about 90+% of recruiters are using LinkedIn to find candidates, and 95+% are using it to vet candidates. So having a strong profile, like Joanne, you had said, is incredibly critical. You have to have a strong headline. We talked about creating a personal branding statement. What do you do? How do you do it? Why do you do it? And what do people say about you? That is the most important part of your LinkedIn profile. Also plugging in those keywords that I had mentioned earlier that the algorithm is going to find is really important. So if, for instance, you want to move away from a specific set of expertise or skill that you don't want to use it anymore, pull it out. And you might find this funny, but for those who are still putting their high school education on your LinkedIn, please take it off, because recruiters are not interested in what high school you went to, what you did. So start with your first degree, your college education, etc. Now with Facebook, Facebook for me is also social. It's really hard to find me on Facebook, as a matter of fact, but here it is. Have you noticed that when you apply for a job in an organization, let's say you've applied for a job in UNICEF or WFP or Save the Children, you will see that somebody from that organization looks at your LinkedIn profile. That should tell you that they are also looking at your Facebook. So it is time to clean up. What are you posting on Facebook? What are you saying on Facebook? Recruiters are looking at that. Plus, there are those groups that you want to make sure, be mindful that there is an alignment between, go back to your personal MVV, the mission, vision, and values. What is your face group presence saying about you, and what groups are you involved with? And yes, there are a lot of professional groups that you can join, tap into. And because some of us squirm when we hear the word networking, think about it as creating meaningful and lasting relationships by asking for those informational interviews that Joanne had mentioned. Thank you.
Amazing. And Liat, you mentioned that you're probably not as, you're not taking advantage of social media in the ways that you could. So I'm gonna skip you because we have one more question that popped up, and I'll ask Chibesa, when would you recommend somebody should work with a career coach?
So first of all, we need to understand what a career coach does. I tend to say that I wear several hats for my clients. I can be an accountability partner. I can be a thought leader, a sounding board, a drill surgeon. You need to do your homework in order to achieve your career goals. I also consider myself to be really number one fan, like a cheerleader. So when you're using a career coach, you need to understand what it is that you're looking for. Are you an active job seeker? Are you looking for ways in which to network? Are you looking to improve the way you present your cover letters, your CV, your resume? Or do you need someone to help you build an online brand that is compelling enough for employers to find you? So everybody's situation is going to be unique. The most important thing is to understand what it is that you're going to get out of that relationship with a career coach. And may I recommend that you suggest a 15-minute intake session that is complimentary, also to see that the career coach is a good match for your needs.
Yeah, that's amazing advice. I definitely think that's true. Interview the career coach and make sure they're right for you. So we're getting close to the end here. I don't see any more questions in the chat. So I think I'm going to hand this off to Yael, who's going to help us wrap up the session. This is not just the end of our career panel, but this is actually the last session for the Focal Point Fest. So I really want to thank each and every one of you for joining us. We're so grateful that you were here. Liat, Chibesa, rock stars. I look forward to meeting you. I'm already connecting with you on LinkedIn. I hope we'll get the chance to work together again. And Yael, please take on from here.
Thank you so much, Joanne, Liat, and Chibesa. This has been a great career panel, and I wish I would have heard all of you as I started my career. Before my job at Olam, I was looking for a job for 9 months here in DC, and I did everything possible, and it was exhausting. But the good thing about the search and about meeting all these people is that you get to hear so many interesting stories, and you get to kind of be inspired by various roles and positions, things that you never really thought are out there. So thank you for your time, and I hope those who tuned in, whether it's from the event in Jerusalem or around the world, were able to learn today and are able to use these tips for your own career search. So this is actually the final virtual session for our Focal Point Fest at the end of our 3rd day. And I want to thank all of you, whether you're watching now or not, all of you who tuned in the last 3 days. It was amazing to learn from everyone. It was amazing to meet new people, build new relationships. And as we say every year, it doesn't have to stop here. We, the Olam team, the Olam organization and network, are around all year, and we will continue to provide networking opportunities. Every quarter, we host together, actually, with Joanne's organization, the PAIRS Program for Global Innovation, and with Sid Israel, we host global networking meetups that allow people from all over the world to come together and connect virtually. And we have a newsletter if you want to hear about Olam's work and the work of our partners and hear job opportunities and other events. Please go to our website, olamtogether.org. And we hope to see you all and hear from you throughout the year. So this is a wrap for our Focal Point Fest Conference 2022. So excited to be seeing you next year, maybe in person, maybe virtual. And if by chance there's anyone out there from Washington, DC, the final event is an in-person event in DC for networking and learning. So whoever is in town, I will see you there. And thank you to everyone. Have a good night, have a good afternoon, and we will see you soon. Take care, everyone.